Welcome to Get Paid for Your Pad, the definitive show on Airbnb hosting, featuring the best advice on how to maximize profits from your Airbnb listing, as well as real-life experiences from Airbnb hosts all over the world. Welcome. We are your hosts, Josefa Kapadia and Jasper Rivers.
Get paid for your pad. 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 Get paid for your pad.
Welcome everybody, episode 249 of Get Paid for Your Pad. Today I have a very interesting guest. Her name is Megan McRae and she is a lot of things. Well, first of all, she's the president of the Nashville Area Short-Term Rental Association. She's an Airbnb host in Nashville, and she's also a volunteer for rentresponsibly.org. So Megan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jasper. I'm really excited to talk to you one-on-one. I've been listening to your podcasts as long as I've been a host.
Awesome. I'm very excited as well because we talked a lot about regulations on the podcast. But what I'm really excited about to talk with you is how can we as Airbnb hosts actually do something to influence the regulation and, to contribute to, making places more Airbnb friendly. And that's kind of like what you're an expert on.
Exactly. It's a really important issue and topic. And we spend a lot of time talking about how to be great hosts, but if we don't have the legal ability to be hosts, then all of the other stuff doesn't really matter, does it?
Absolutely. That's a very good point. So we'll talk all about what we as hosts can do. But first, how did you get involved in vacation rental and in Airbnb hosting?
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, I just love travel. So I, was first a guest by way of Airbnb. And when I used to visit Nashville before I lived here, there really weren't any short-term rental options. I always stayed in hotels and never really got to see anywhere in Nashville except the Broadway area. And after moving here for work and going through a reorganization at the company, we found ourselves in a pretty precarious situation and swore I'd never get back there. So once I found a new job and got established, we decided to purchase our first investment property. We had no clue if short-term rentals were going to work for us. And quite frankly, we were hoping we would just cover our mortgage. And if something bad happened, worst case scenario, we would sell the home we lived in and move into that home. But it was a success. And it was something that I never anticipated loving the way that I do. And fast forward to today, we now own 5 short-term rental properties here in Nashville. 4 of those are traditional short-term rentals, and 1 is what we call our extended stay, which is a rental of 30 plus days up to 90 days.
And Nashville is one of the more profitable cities in the US to rent out an Airbnb, according to AirDNA. I remember it always used to be on the top of the list. The AirDNA, the company that provides all sorts of data and analytics. I remember they came out with these lists of what's the most profitable city in the US, and I remember Nashville was always on top. So yeah. It must be like a really good location.
Yeah, if you have a rental now, it is. Unfortunately, with some local newer regulations, it's much harder now to have a short-term rental. But yeah, it's definitely a great area. We have 100 new people moving to Nashville a day, so the city is experiencing tremendous growth. And a lot of popularity also means a lot of tourists coming. So it's been a great market. And we host people from really all over the world. There isn't a pocket per se, just people I think in general are interested in coming to the city.
Yeah, I visited it about 10 years ago. We were talking a little bit before we started recording. You were saying a lot has changed in Nashville. What I remember is staying at what's it called? The Gaylord something.
Yeah,
It's this
the Gaylord
huge.
Opry Hotel.
It almost felt like it was like kind of like a stadium or something. It was this huge building, and there was all this indoor area with like trees, and it was massive.
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely still one of the more popular hotels.
Sweet. So what's going on in Nashville? Are people no longer allowed to do Airbnb, or do you need a permit, or what's going on?
Yeah, sure. So, since 2015, you've needed a permit, regardless of whether you're an in-home host or out-of-home host, investor. And over the course of the last few years, starting with the first permitting process in 2015, there were a series of about 15 different laws that were rolled out, some of which passed, some of which did not. And the end result of that here in Nashville earlier this year was that the city pushed through a law that bans future rentals for hosts that do not live in the home. They also prevented in home hosts from being anything other than themselves, essentially. So if you had your personal home in a trust or an LLC, you were no longer allowed to get a permit. Obviously, that was pretty devastating news for us here in Nashville. And we ended up, our organization, along with some of the platforms and other organizations across the state, band together. And we were able to, at the state level, succeed in passing a bill that would at least grandfather those of us who had operated legally prior to the ban. The ban would have phased anybody who did not live in their home out by the year 2020. So, certainly not the outcome we were hoping for all around. We were hoping to avoid the ban, but at the very least, we were able to protect those who were operating legally prior to that law passing.
Okay, well that's a success.
Mhm.
What's How did you guys manage to to get this done? Like what were the things that you did in order to make that happen?
Yeah, sure. So, honestly, it was it was a huge effort all around. We tried to connect with other organizations across the state. We tried to reach out to hosts through different forums and Facebook groups to let them know to reach out to their state senators and their House representatives. We also, one of our members, her name is Jennifer, she came up with the idea to sort of turn the tides on the conversation. It was all this big business. This is about Airbnb, and really it's about the little guys, honestly. And we came up with a hashtag called Home Share Helps. And we started encouraging hosts to hashtag and tag their state representatives and House representatives, telling their home share story. So it's helped, for instance, it's helped me have the security after losing a job. And it's helped me now leave a full time job. Some people, it allows them to stay home with their children. And so we really focused on the positives that home share does for the hosts that are renting out their homes, whether they live there or not, and also just the economic benefit of short-term rentals in a market. So I think those were some of the key elements that helped us succeed. Certainly, partnering with the platforms Airbnb and HomeAway. All of us kind of being on the same page and trying to push for the same things, I think was helpful too.
And you recently did an interview with Heather at Cottage Blogger,
Mhm.
and I've noticed that you talked about why do Airbnb hosts need to stop calling themselves an Airbnb? I'm
Absolutely.
I'm very curious. Like why is that?
Yeah. So I think what was really hard, we saw it first here locally in Nashville, and then we saw the same thing play out at the state level with Tennessee, is this came about with the narrative that neighborhoods are fighting the big bad Airbnb. And my background is in advertising and marketing. And to me, Airbnb is a way to connect me with guests. It's a marketing platform, it's an advertising platform with the added bonus of some security, guest background checks and things like that. Home away is the same thing. And a lot of people were defining themselves as a VRBO or an Airbnb. And really, all that did was play into the perception that this is neighborhoods fighting Airbnb. No, this is neighborhoods fighting your neighbors. Honestly, 88% of the hosts in Nashville live right here in the state. And we would be the ones impacted, and we're the ones impacted with a ban passing. At the end of the day, I'm sure Airbnb thinks that Nashville is an important market, but they're across the globe, right? If Nashville passes a ban, this isn't going to break Airbnb, but it would break the many hosts who have homes that they rent out using platforms like Airbnb. So I think it's just important to take responsibility for being a homeowner. And, certainly I'm guilty of it myself. If somebody will look at me like I have three heads when I say I have short-term rentals or I have vacation rentals, I'm like, it's like Airbnb. And then I have to go through that whole spiel, right? But I think it's just really important because, if we keep playing into that, our local municipalities are just going to look at this still as the local guy versus the big bad Airbnb. Not that I think they're big and bad, but you know what I mean. So I think that that's really why we've tried to make an emphasis on that.
Right. So how would you call yourself? An accommodations provider?
Well, I call myself a hospitality curator, but when you're talking to your local government or you're trying to activate local hosts, I'm a homeowner. And I think that's what we lose sight of. I mean, everyone wants to criticize us for making money on our home. And quite frankly, isn't that the American dream? What's different from me renting out my home for 2 nights versus somebody renting it out for a year? You're still making money on it. That doesn't mean it's a commercial business, which has been the whole talk track of the neighborhood groups trying to say that this is why these things shouldn't be allowed. So I just say I'm a homeowner and I rent my home out on a short-term basis. And that is really what we try to stress when it comes to talking to the local representation.
And is there a lot of opposition against short-term rentals in Nashville?
Oh, yeah. We were told by several people that this is probably one of the, if not the most contentious markets. There's an actual coalition that formed that is 100% dedicated to anti-short-term rental activism. And honestly, the fight got pretty nasty to the point where I think that's why a lot of owners of short-term rentals didn't want to be involved. We had this group would drive by our homes, our rental homes, and post pictures and addresses out publicly, which, just for safety reasons, that's not a nice thing to do, right? And they would do things like that, or, basically just watch our listings to try to slip us up or catch us doing the littlest thing wrong so they could report us to codes to get our permits revoked. And so, it was pretty nasty. And I hate how nasty it got, honestly, because, we kind of just tried to be the bigger person and turn the cheek. But unfortunately, that resulted in some cases in us losing in the court of public opinion because we didn't stand up and say, you're wrong and you're not telling the truth, and really tell the positive side of short-term rentals.
And why are these people so against short-term rentals and Airbnb?
I really wish I knew the answer to that. They feel like from what we hear, and I don't want to sound like I don't empathize, because there are certainly people who have done this and aren't doing it in a neighborly way. The big party houses, no one wants to live by that. But I think what drives the most of it is fear. A lot of what's crazy is this particular group, they a lot of them live kind of near short-term rentals, but not most of them don't even live next to one. So I think what drives a lot of it is fear, right? I don't know who's coming into my neighborhood, or I don't know what the result of this is going to be. Um, and I think what's difficult is, I mean, I'm in my mid 30s, and I don't have children, but I have a younger brother who's 11 and a half years younger. And even he is growing up in a different world than I did. I didn't grow up with a cell phone. I didn't get one until after high school. Right. And I didn't really, or I knew my neighbors, but he sure doesn't, And so I think short-term rentals kind of are getting blamed for a lot of things that are just the growth of the world, right? Technology's changed things. We interact as society different than we did back then. You had to know your neighbors because you had to walk over and ask them for sugar. And now you can have sugar delivered, right? So I think that that's really what's driving this, is just fear of the unknown in most cases, even though that's not their talk path. No one wants to admit that.
Well, let's talk about the most important part, I guess, of all this, and that's what can Airbnb host, what can we do as Airbnb hosts or short-term rental managers to influence the regulations? What can we do to create more Airbnb or short-term rental friendly environments?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, be a good neighbor. A lot of this stems from one or two problems that make the headlines. So do your due diligence and make sure you're vetting your guests, make sure you're going over and, even if you don't live locally, you can still reach out to the people who live next to your homes and, make sure they know who you are and how to contact you if there's a concern or if there's a problem, and make sure you communicate to your guests that they're coming into an environment that is a neighborhood, and that hopefully will shine through. And I think the more of us that can do that, the more people realize, hey, we can all coexist together. So that would be the first thing. If you don't have your neighbor on speed dial and they don't have you on speed dial, that's a problem. Second would be to connect with other hosts in the area so that collectively you have a voice. I see a lot of folks who sort of divide because they feel like I'm an in-home host and I don't really want to align with maybe an out-of-home host or a host that doesn't live there. And we all as hosts need to come together. So coming together and learning from one another, having a voice together is really important. And if there is no organization, then you can still do that in a more informal way. But if there is an organization like we have here in Nashville, join it. Often it's like our organization, we are 100% volunteer based and donation based. So we survive off of our memberships and people being a part of it. And then I think lastly, just, making local connections, both local businesses as well as your local representatives. They need to know that you are a person. You're not a company that's headquartered in California. You are somebody who has a home in their area, whether you live in their area or your rental home is there. And you can do that in person. You can do that through email. You can do that over the phone. But I think the more that our local representatives realize they are affecting real people, the better off we're all going to be.
Awesome. So be a good host, connect with other hosts in your community. And there's usually some Facebook groups or other platforms where people get together. And if there is not an organization yet in your area, why not start one? That's very good advice. Making local connections with local businesses, I think that's a really important point, and something that a lot of people kind of forget to do. But I think one of the advantages of Airbnb and short-term rentals is that the tourists get more spread out over the city, right? I mean, the neighborhood where I used to rent out in Amsterdam before it got banned, There simply weren't any hotels in my neighborhood, and so the only way for people to stay there would be to get a short-term rental. And I think it's very beneficial for local businesses, because when everybody is kind of concentrated in certain hotel areas, that's where people are going to spend the money, right? But businesses don't know this, right? Businesses can't see that somebody who walks into their shop is staying at a short-term rental, right? We don't carry like labels or something like, "Hey, I'm staying at an Airbnb."
Right,
and
exactly.
and so I think it's important to kind of create awareness, and and let those businesses know, "Hey, I have a short-term rental, and there's a lot of people who visit, and I sent them over to your business because I really like your coffee shop, or your art gallery, or whatever it may be."
Absolutely. I think the that is often an understated fact. We know we send businesses, but I think the more you can forge those relationships, the better. We actually, as an organization, just launched a local business program where we have gone to local tour companies, local restaurants, and you name it, right? Anything that people would want to do while they're here in Nashville, including the big tourist traps, if you will, but also the local companies that you're just simply not going to find out about if you're not staying in those areas. And it is shocking how well received it's being received by those local businesses, because they don't have a way to reach the people staying in short-term rentals. And we hope that that will create some really good partnerships amongst local businesses and short-term rental owners here. One thing I will say too, when you talked about how to get involved, when I stepped into this role in Nashville, it was very unplanned, unexpected. I had just joined the board of the organization, and the only seat open on the board was the VP role. And within about a month, our president resigned. So I automatically became the president, with no board experience or anything like that. And there wasn't a lot to go on. It was sort of like changing oil on a moving car, trying to figure out what to do. And that's really where this alliance with Rent Responsibly has come from. Dave and I were talking like, how would somebody know how to start an organization, how to keep one running? And so what we're doing on rentresponsibly.org, which is a not-for-profit, is we are collecting a list of local organizations that we know exist. We're collecting resources if you want to start a local organization, or if you need ideas to help get one or keep one going. But basically, we're trying to just help really enable advocacy and responsible renting through that not-for-profit group.
So if people listen to this podcast and they think, I want to get involved, what are the first steps? Like, what can they do?
Yeah. So, I think that, first and foremost, if they want to check out the Rent Responsibly Facebook group, we're starting to post things there as we speak. This is a really new thing for us. And right now, most organizations just reach out to me and I kind of walk them through it. So we're putting up like playbook pieces, if you will, there. The other piece would be just to research if there is an organization in their area already. I would hate for somebody to recreate the wheel if something already exists. Join forces, and if something needs to be better, then help them be better and get involved that way, versus a city having like this group over here and that group over there, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I'm looking at the website, actually, rentresponsibly.org.
Mm-hmm.
And I see you have kind of like a visual of the overall support by the general public, I guess. And it shows that only 15% is opposed to short-term rentals. So that's actually a fairly small minority.
Yeah, I think that's what's interesting. And I can really only speak to Nashville, but we had a couple of media companies, as well as Vanderbilt University did some public opinion polls. an overwhelmingly, I think the lowest public opinion poll came in the high 70% of people being in support of short-term rentals. But I think what happens is it's that whole concept of the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So you get a small group of people who are against it in an area, and all of a sudden big changes happen. I mean, here in Nashville, most of our public opinion polls were in the 80% ranges of people supporting, yet we still somehow got a ban passed because the perception of the city was that most residents didn't want it. When really it's just like most residents don't care. They're just not going to show up to a public hearing to tell you that, right? So that's all the more that we all need to have our voices heard and be active, even if it's not being discussed right now, because it only takes one or two people to start that wheel turning. And once it's in motion, it's really hard to stop something from moving forward.
Right. So if all the Airbnb hosts in the whole country would get together and become active in advocating short-term rentals, then we'll probably be able to create a much more friendly environment for short-term rentals, because like you said, it's all about the awareness, it's all about being heard. And politicians, they can't, they go by what they hear, right? So if all the people who are against short-term rentals, if they sort of like if they cry very loud and we're all very quiet, then their perception is going to be that a lot of people or most people are against this. And in the end of the day, that's what politicians are very sensitive to, right? So I think it's great the work that you're doing, and I think it's really important. I guess most hosts don't actually get involved, right, with advocating short-term rentals and get involved in local communities and stuff. And why do you think that is?
Man, I think there are a lot of reasons. I think probably the biggest is most people just don't understand how it will impact them, or they don't think it will impact them. So, for example, for a while here in Nashville, they never really talked about what we call owner occupied or in home hosts. And so a lot of those folks just said, well, hey, look, I I appreciate what everyone else is doing, but I don't really want to put myself out there and, draw attention to myself from the neighborhood groups or whatever. And then all of a sudden they're coming after owner occupieds, and it's like, whoa, wait, what happened? So I think that first and foremost, that's probably the biggest challenge, is a lot of people just have no idea that it will impact them. Um, but what I have to say, my background, I think I shared, is 19 years in media, advertising, and marketing. And man, I mean, I worked for newspaper companies, and all of a sudden Google popped up, right? And I could have never imagined a world where newspapers weren't thriving. And I think we all know the storyline there. So I'm looking at this going, hey, what happens if these regulations start passing all over and people just get in the mindset that short-term rentals are bad or they're illegal? What happens to travel? What happens when somebody thinks twice about staying in a short-term rental in Florida because they're from Nashville and they think that short-term rentals are party houses, and they've been told not to support quote unquote Airbnbs and VRBOs? And so I think that we all have to understand that this really has a far-reaching impact on all of us, even if it's not happening in your city or with your type of rental. It absolutely impacts anybody who is a host. I think the other piece is just, quite frankly, I hear this a lot time. I don't really know many people who are only full-time hosts. Most people are parents and work full-time jobs and have families and have lives, and short-term rentals are one of the things they do. I understand busy. I traveled for work full-time, worked a full-time job, have 5 rentals that I personally manage. I run Nastra with a really good board and group of people here. But the time you don't have will go away if your ability to rent goes away. So I would really say, don't let time be a factor for not getting involved. Make time, even if it's 5 minutes to write your local representatives, or to join your group and stay abreast of what's going on. I think that you really should consider making the time to get involved.
Awesome, very good advice. And how can people reach out to you? And or maybe people are listening here, they're in Nashville. How can they get involved? And where can people find information? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who are listening and thinking, yeah, I wouldn't mind getting involved. I would like to do something. So what can people do? How can they get in touch with you? And how can they find more information?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of ways. So, there's a Rent Responsibly Facebook group that they can start. We're still working, like I said, on building out some of those resources. They should be coming over the next few weeks, but if they join, they can watch those. I'm obviously an active member of that group. So once they're in there, they'll be able to find me and chat with me. And then for hosts in Nashville, I would definitely encourage you to visit our NASTRA website, which is NASTRA.org. And you can become a member there if you're a legally operating short-term rental here in the city. So those are probably the best ways to get in touch with me. And obviously, Jasper, I'm sure, I know your notes, you often share links. So if I went too fast, they can probably click the links from you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I will put all the links in the show notes, all the websites that you've mentioned and the Facebook groups and all that good stuff. So people can go to getpaidforyourpet.com. And then when you go to podcasts, you will find the show notes of all the 249 episodes that we've recorded so far. All right. Well, Megan, thank you so much, first of all, for doing all the great work that you're doing. I really appreciate that. And also for taking the time to come on the podcast and share your story and your advice and inspire other people to get involved in the Airbnb communities. And together we can create a better landscape for short-term rentals and let us be heard and change the perception of people who think that all Airbnbs are like illegal hotels and party houses and people most Airbnb hosts have like multiple properties and it's really not. That's really not the case, right? And so I think it's really important the work that you do. So thank you for that. And for the listeners, thanks for listening. And of course, next week on Wednesday, it will be episode 250. So major milestone. So it's going to be fun. So thanks for listening. And until next time.
Get paid for your pet. 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 Get paid for your pet.